Okay. So this week's parsha is Parshas Chayei Sarah. Chayei Sarah means the life of Sara. Interestingly, ironically, at one level it's called Chayei Sarah because those are perhaps the first memorable, unique words in this week's parsha that differentiate it. It says Vayiyu Chayei Sarah, and the life of Sara was, and it tells us 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. But it's a lot more than, it's not just coincidence, it's not just that's what works. The name necessarily has to be about the theme of the message of the parsha, and this week's parsha is called the life of Sara, even though it opens up telling us about post her passing, about once Sara was already deceased. There is no point during this week's parsha in which Sara is actually alive. So that's another whole conversation for itself. Super briefly, like very, very briefly, and I want to say it because it's such a beautiful idea and lesson, and it carries so much meaning and such heavy, powerful meaning. That's also the same reason that it's like a shame for me to mention it in 30 to 60 seconds rather than 30 to 60 minutes or hours. But I can't do more than that. But I don't want to just go away and leave it. And that is that it's in the legacy that remains when someone's gone that we see the meaning and the value and the purpose of the life that they lived. And this week's parsha, which opens up immediately after Sara passes away, it's in the story after she passes away, in what we see in her family, in her children, in her community, in the legacy that remains behind once her soul is no longer in her body in this world. That's where we see the true beauty and power and value of the life that she lived. So, in some sense, it's not that the life begins after one passes away, but the evidence of one's life, the measurement, the evidence of the life that one lived actually first starts to show up after a person passes away. So that's that. Now, it says, it opens up and it says, and the life of Sara was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And so there's a medrash that brings Sara as an example and says that just like the Torah tells us about her age and that she lived these years, and the Torah is telling us that these are the years that she was destined to live. And her years were complete, and this is why it says 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. It tells us very explicitly, breaks it down, keeps on saying years. But the Medrash doesn't say it's just about Sara. The Medrash tells us there's a rule about tzaddikim, about righteous people. Kashem shahem tmimim, just like they are complete, kach shnoisam tmimim, so too are their years complete. And it brings Sara as like the figurehead or the face, the archetype of this. And the Medrash says it about Sara, but then it's saying it's not just about Sara, it's true of all truly righteous people, that they are complete, and just like they are complete, so too are their years complete.
What does it mean that they are complete?
Good question. We're going to talk about exactly what that means. Because complete is a very specific word. Right, and now we know we're talking about tzaddikim, so there's nothing new that we're obviously not just talking about the fact that they did all good things and they didn't do bad, because that's already built into the name tzaddik. So what is it exactly that it's referring to here, the completeness? That's a question that we're just about to ask, which is going to help us sort of unpack this whole thing and see what's really going on here and what's the whole picture. So one question is, okay, what exactly does complete mean? Right, it's a very specific word. And the choice of that very specific word is obviously intentional. So what is it? What is the message that is being communicated with that very specific choice of words? Also, why specifically Sara of all people? Why does the Medrash choose Sara as the archetype of this idea of the righteous people are complete, and so too their years are complete. Not that there's any reason she shouldn't be, but there are lots of other choices available. Now, sometimes you could a question like this, in a sense, doesn't really mean much as a question, because you could ask that about anything. Well, I don't know, why did someone got dressed, and you look at them and say, well, why did you wear that outfit today? I mean, you might say, well, hello, it's like boiling. Why are you wearing a fur coat? It's boiling outside. That would be one question. But if you're just like, oh, why that outfit? Why not that one? It's like, I don't know. Like, if I would have worn that one, you could have asked me, why not this one? But yeah, that's true. You could have. Right? So you could always ask, why not the other one? You could always ask that anytime there's more than one option of something available. Now, the question here is not, well, why choose Sara? We should have chosen someone else. It is that question that, if you're asking that question of another person, sometimes it might just not be a valid question. It's like, I don't know, I picked the first thing out of my wardrobe, or that's what I felt like, or that's what was, I reached in and that's what came out, whatever it is. Like, what, should I have not worn it? And the person might be like, no, I'm just curious why you chose that one. It's like, yeah, okay, well, whatever I would have chosen, you could have said, well, why not something else? That's true. But when it comes to the Torah, the Torah is, nothing is just by chance. There's no such thing as, oh, I just reached in and this was the thing that came out. There's no such thing as a medrash was like, well, we need to pick a righteous person. Let's just pull one out of a hat. Oh, Sara came out. Let's use her. Let's go with that. Right now, let's say, for example, if you know someone who, going back to this analogy of choosing an outfit to wear, if there's someone who you know is very intentional and they never put anything on without thinking about it and choosing very specifically, and everything that they put together into an outfit is very intentional, what they wear on any given day is very intentional. And so you might come to them one day and be like, oh, hey, like, why are you wearing this today? Now, it still might not be, well, you should have worn something else, but it's not just like, well, why this and not something else? Well, you could have, no, this is a person who put thought into it and made the choice for a reason, and you're curious, like, well, I know it's a given that when you got dressed this morning, or when you got your clothes ready last night, or whatever it is, you chose everything intentionally, specifically for a reason, and there was a calculation, so I'm curious what it was. Right? That's what this is like here. The Midrash didn't pick a random righteous person out of a hat. If Sara was chosen as the archetype of this, as the figurehead, there's a reason. Now, part of that reason is going to tie back into the question that we had asked earlier, which is, what exactly does it mean, tamimim? Right? It says, just like they are tamimim, means complete. It's not perfect. Sometimes it could be translated that way, but it's not about being perfect. And because at the end of the day, perfection for a person, like it doesn't even, it's not really a thing. It doesn't exist. I don't think the word perfect even makes sense to be applied to a person. There is so much complexity and so many variables and things. But complete. What does complete mean? Complete means whole. Whole, what does whole mean? Whole, W-H-O-L-E, not H-O-L-E. Whole means there's nothing missing. Now, we actually, interestingly, the Torah gives us the insight into what is it that we're getting at when we say complete, and why is Sara the archetype of this? It's spelled out in connection to her husband, Avraham Avinu. So Avraham Avinu and Sara were a couple, a unit. They are a composite pair of two people, but they were a team. And they shared everything. And so the Torah actually uses Sara as the figurehead and the archetype of completeness. And just like she was complete, so too her years were complete. And then when it comes to Avram Avinu, that's where the Torah spells it out and says, oh, let's look at the other half of this person to see what that actually means. What are we getting at here? And there's also another thing which is that we're going to clarify as we break this down and understand it all, and that is, what's the connection between the two things? Between being complete and having years that are complete. Just like she was complete, so too her years are complete. A righteous person, just like they are complete, their years are complete. Now, this is not a case of like some random thing that's, like, I don't know, maybe a parent who desperately wants their child to stand straight and smile nicely in the family photo, and they're trying to communicate a whole bunch of people, and two of the kids aren't cooperating because they're cranky. And then maybe one of the parents is like, look guys, if you stand straight and smile, I'm going to give you a candy afterwards. Right? There's no connection between standing straight, smiling, and cooperating and giving a candy. It's just like, maybe that's leverage. That's something that might bribe or influence or produce the desired outcome. Right? But that's not what's going on here. It's not like, oh, just like they were complete, so we'll give them a candy, so too their years are complete. No, it says just like. You don't say, just like you stood straight in the photo, I also gave you a candy. It's like, no. Just like is not the right choice of words here. You could say, because you stood straight and smiled and cooperated, therefore I'll give you a candy as a reward. But if you say, just like this, so too that, you're going to use those words when there's a connection, when there's a parallel, when there's an equivalence between the two things. And when there are two things that have an equivalence between them and a connection and a relationship, you can compare and say, just like this here, so too that over there. So what's the equivalence or relevance and relationship and parallel here between the completeness of the person and the completeness of the years? That is the outcome. Just like they were complete, so too their years were complete. Just like she was complete, so too her years were complete. So what is the completeness? What does complete mean? And what's the correlation, the connection between the person being complete and that having somehow playing out in the years? In the person filling out all their days and living to all the days that were allotted to them and not passing away sooner than that. So when it comes to Avram Avinu, one of the things that the Torah says about Avram Avinu is it says Va'avraham Zakein Bayamim. Right? And literally, and Avram was old, elderly, literally coming in days or coming of days. Right? And yeah, that's like a nice poetic, descriptive way of saying things. We're using different words and, to make it sound nice. He was old and coming of days. But again, this is a pasuk in Torah, which means that if it says those two things, it says both of them for a reason. So Zaken and Ba Bayomim are two different things, and they don't necessarily go hand in hand, right? And this is what the sages tell us is a message here, that sometimes a person can be Zaken, can be old. Now when you picture someone old, yes, I noticed when I wrote it, but it's an aleph, Va'avraham, and Avraham. Is that better? So on that note, my mother a few years ago, relatively recently, found all my school reports. I don't know, found them or just decided to share them. She sent me all my reports, so I have all my reports from school, from like when I was a little kid. I haven't even gone through all of them, but I read through like the first few years, and basically every 6 months for like several years, the report said the exact same thing, which is not all of it's relevant, but Shirley, that's the name that's what I was called as a kid. Shirley is, doing well and blah, 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 and capable. He, has some things that he could work on. could work on cooperating with other students and trying harder, putting in more effort, and improving his handwriting. Every single time, that was always in there, and improving his handwriting. And if I get a report now, it'll still say that I could work on improving my handwriting, but it is what it is. I can handle that. So when you picture someone, if I would say, oh, that person's old, what comes to mind immediately? Gray hair, wrinkles, low energy, frail, right? So old is a description of the person. And then Baba Yomim refers not so much to the person, but to their relationship with time, to the passage of time. You could have someone who's old at a very young age. I mean, some people go white very young. There are some families where people have a full head of white hair at 30 years old. Some people can be very wise when they're young. There are different things that we associate with older people that some people could have when they're young. Right? So a person can be old at an early age. A person can, let's say, seem like a 90-year-old when they're 50, but a person can't be 90 years old without having been alive for 90 years. Right? So Baba Yomim, coming of days, means it's not about the person, it's about the relationship with the days. So he was old and coming of days, or coming, Baba Yomim, literally coming in days. Now, in the context of the life of a person who's dedicated to realizing our purpose, realizing the purpose of our existence, realizing the purpose of the existence of the universe, fulfilling that with which Hashem charged us, the responsibility, the obligation, the opportunity, the privilege, all of the above. These two terms can refer to two different very big parts of what we're here to do, why we're here. Right now, there are obviously a lot of things that we're here to do, but we could break it down, let's say, into two categories. And it's not only two categories of things, it's two categories of mission and purpose. And in general, more or less, all the things we do have a foot on each side of this fence. Generally, all the things we do play a part in both, but we can choose to really focus on one more than the other. Right? So part of what we're here to do is to become a more spiritually enlightened, integrated person, a more spiritually oriented person. Right? Let's call it personal development. Personal development according to Torah. And it's a very important part of what we're here, of why we're here. To work on ourselves, to work on our character traits, to work to overcome challenges, to become more resilient, to become more focused, to become more clear, to become more spiritually oriented, etc. And then there is the part of our purpose, which is the impact that we have on the world. Which is that we are here to be a vehicle and an ambassador to integrate godliness into the world around us, to integrate divinity into the world around us. We're not just here to improve ourselves. If we were, we could have just existed spiritually and worked on our spiritual progress as spiritual entities without physical bodies in a physical world. We are here to, through the thoughts that we think, the words that we speak, and the things that we do, our interactions with the world around us, our interactions with the people around us, our interactions with community, etc., to integrate divinity, godliness, infinity into the world around us. And so this old and coming of or in days refer to these two things. Zokein, old, is about the person, the condition, the status of the person. So when we say Avram, Zokein, Avram was an old person. He was wise. He had accumulated a lifetime of experience, of facing and overcoming challenges, of working hard, of doing the best he could to recognize the truth in a way that no one else ever had, of being a good person and always becoming a better person every day. So that's the Zokin. He was old. He had all of these positive characteristics that a person can continue to accumulate over the course of their life. Right? And when we picture someone who's old, there are a few, perhaps, let's say, genres of things that could be coming to mind. Some of them are going to be visual, some of them are going to be emotional. And a lot of times, if someone's lucky enough to have, to have met or known a person who's like this, who's this, archetypal, like old, wise person, someone who you go to for insight, to hear stories, for advice, as a sounding board. Why? Because this person has had a whole lifetime of learning, of seeing things, of understanding things more and more and more and more deeply and more complexly, and being able to accumulate layers and layers and layers and layers of depth and complexity of understanding and insight, wisdom. Right? So Avraham Avinu was this, he was old. Old refers to the state of the person. So he had worked on himself, developed himself. He was a person who had already done a lifetime of work and growth and development. Old. Bo Bayomim refers not to the person, but to the relationship with the world around them. The days. Right? In terms of personal development, hypothetically, right, why is it the case that a person, I could wake up on Sunday, put tefillin on 6 times, and then I'm good to go until Shabbos. I put tefillin on 6 times already this week. Right? It doesn't work that way. Why? Because when I put on tefillin, there are 2 things that happen. And this is true with every mitzvah. One thing that happens is that I'm putting on tefillin, I am connecting to the Creator, to the infinity of the Creator, through doing this mitzvah, putting on the tefillin, etc. Another thing that I'm doing is being a conduit for the channeling of the infinity of the Creator into the leather straps, into the parchment that's inside the tefillin, into all of the molecules that are moving as I talk, as I pray, as I say the bracha, the blessing while I put them on, into the time itself. Right? Time is something that exists. Time is a relatively abstract thing. It's not tangible, it's not material, but it is something that exists. Time exists, a moment of time exists. When we do a mitzvah, we are channeling divinity into that moment of time, into that day, into that minute, into that hour. So I have to put on tefillin 6 times throughout the week on 6 different days, and that way I am channeling the divinity that is channeled through the mitzvah of tefillin into each day. This is also why it's preferable when it comes to tzedakah. Now, there is complexity if a specific opportunity comes up, etc. That it is what it is. But let's say a person just says, I'm going to put however much money it is, whether it's $1 or $100, whatever, into charity over the course of the week. It is preferable to divide it up and to put in a portion of that each day. Obviously, with the exception of Shabbos, because we don't handle money on Shabbos, but to put some of it into charity on Sunday and some on Monday, some on Tuesday, etc. Why? Because as we do that, when it comes to tzedakah specifically, there's a number of other factors at play also. But by giving that tzedakah spread out over the week, we are now integrating the divinity and the infinity and the soul of that mitzvah and that action, that good deed, that charity, into each day. And each day is a separate entity. It's a separate unit of time. So every time we do something positive, we are channeling divinity, spirituality, godliness into whatever things we are using, whatever things we're using in the mitzvah. Light Shabbos candles, we're channeling the divinity into the match, into the wick, into the oil or the wax or the paraffin, into the money that we use to buy all of those things, We could trace it all the way back, right? There's all of those things are now having divinity integrated into them because they're part of the mitzvah. You know what else we're integrating divinity into? Into that point in time, that moment in time, into the day, into the week, into the space that we're in, right? We exist inside of time and space. Everything that we do, everything that happens inside of time and inside of space. Which means that when we channel divinity through ourselves, when we channel godliness through ourselves into the world around us, or even just into our bodies, it is being channeled into that moment in time and into that point in space by definition, because we're in that point in space and in that moment in time. The things that we do are important and they matter, not just because we have to do them. Not just because it's good for us to do them. But because when we do them, when every action that we do, right, let's say lighting a Shabbos candle, putting on tefillin, putting a coin in a charity box, or giving the money to a person, or buying someone who's hungry some food, whatever it is. Right, every one of those things, there are the physical, there's the coin, there's the cash, the credit card, the wick, the leather, the straps, the parchment. And you know what else there is? There's also the energy, the calories, the energy that we had to use in order to move our arms, to move our feet. Every action requires and uses energy. The energies, the calories of energy that we used get elevated and have divinity integrated into them. Where did those calories come from? We got them from food. So the food that we ate now has become elevated and had divinity integrated into it. And the ingredients that we used to make the food, well, the ingredients that we used to make the food were in the food, so it's the same thing. But the work that was done to produce those ingredients, the action of plowing the field and putting the seeds in the ground and harvesting the wheat, etc., and raising the cow to get the beef, whatever it is, think about it. I've mentioned this several times, but I heard this really interesting story once of someone who wanted it was like, yeah, well, I want a sandwich. If I want a BLT, a beef lettuce tomato sandwich, what do? I just go to the corner store, swipe my credit card for $5 or $3, or depending. If it's kosher, it's going to be a lot more than that. But I get my sandwich and I go home. And he was like, yeah, but hang on a second. There was, I don't know if I should say this, it's not super nice, but I'm not going to say who it was. It was just, I found it very comical. A lot of people did. There was someone who makes a living commenting on things. A YouTube armchair commentator. And he has quite a substantial following. He was once on a plane, like flying over middle America. And he took a photo out of the window of like the land, and it had all of these like lines, and it looked like patchwork, and they all looked like just this big patchwork on the ground. And he tweeted and said, "Why does it look like that?" And his tweet got very ratioed. It was probably his most ratioed tweet ever, of people saying, "I know that you live in a city and you think that food just appears on the shelf in the supermarket, but someone actually had to produce that food. It had to grow somewhere. That looks like that because those are fields on a farm where someone's actually making the food that you swipe your credit card to pick up in your, in your supermarket." So a person eating a sandwich, let's say a sandwich, especially a BLT or a meat salad sandwich, whatever it is a good example, because there's bread, there's meat, there are vegetables. In order just to have that one sandwich, someone had to raise a cow, someone had to grow a field of wheat, someone had to grow vegetables, someone had to raise chickens to get the eggs for the mayonnaise, assuming that there's mayonnaise in it if there is. So what this person did was they decided they are going to make themselves a BLT from scratch, producing all the ingredients themselves from scratch to see like, what does it cost and what does it take? And they ended up costing like, I think the number ended up being something like $1,500. Now, obviously, once you're doing that, you can get a lot more than one sandwich out of it, but you can't not do all of those things just to get that one sandwich. Right? So for that one sandwich, you had to raise, assuming that B is for beef in this example, you had to raise a whole cow. which is a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of space. You've got to plant and harvest wheat and thresh the wheat and sort it and grind it into flour and do the same thing, grow the lettuce and raise the chickens and get the eggs and make the mayonnaise, all of those things. It's like probably how long does it take for a cow to go from being a calf to being ready for beef? I don't know, a couple of years, I'm not sure. Right? But it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, a lot of resources. All of those things, when you go to the store and you buy a sandwich, you swipe your credit card, you take the sandwich home, you make a bracha, you eat the sandwich, and then you go about your day and you do the things you need to do. And doing those things you need to do, it might be lighting Shabbos candles, might be putting on tefillin, it might be smiling at someone who needs a smile when you walk past them down the street. It might be taking a rest, if that's what you need to do right now to be the person you're supposed to be and live the life you're supposed to live. It might be any number of things, but if we use those calories, that energy, to do something that we are supposed to be doing, by doing that thing that we're supposed to be doing, and again, it could be a mitzvah, it could be doing just whatever we're supposed to be doing in that moment. For me, a lot of times it's changing a diaper. When I change a diaper, if that's what I'm supposed to be doing, which it always is if I'm doing it, by definition, the calories that I'm using to move my hands came from some food, so I am now channeling divinity into the food that I ate. Now, if what I ate happened to be a meat and vegetable sandwich, I'm channeling godliness into the calories, into the food that I ate to obtain those calories, into all of the work that went into planting that field and harvesting the field and threshing the grain and grinding it into flour and planting the whatever other vegetables and the calf, raising the calf, etc. All of those things. And then the calories that those people spent doing that work and the food that they ate to get the calories to do that work, all of that is part of the chain, and all of that has divinity integrated into it. In addition to the space in which we are doing those things, right? If we are studying Torah right now, we are channeling the infinity of the Creator into this space, into this room. These sound waves are, the sound waves that I'm creating as I speak are hitting all of your eardrums, which is why you can hear. They're also hitting the walls and the floor and the ceiling. These are sound waves of Torah, so the walls and the floor of this and the ceiling are being elevated. The space through which they're passing, there's the air, that's the movement through the air, there are the molecules that are involved, and there's the actual space that's involved. The space itself becomes elevated. I'm trying to remember the specifics of the story. I believe it's a story with the Baal Shem Tov, and I should know the story. Some sort of story, something I think he sent someone, maybe... I'm possibly conflating several stories here. I have a bad habit of doing that. Stories are not my thing. But maybe he sent his student somewhere and the student landed up in this place and could not figure out why the Baal Shem Tov wanted him to go there, and it was looking around trying to find something to do, nothing to do. He got thirsty, he found a stream, took a drink of water, kept looking for what to do, couldn't figure out anything, went back to the Baal Shem Tov and was like, I went there, I don't know exactly what I was supposed to do. And the Baal Shem Tov told him, that space and that stream of water has been waiting since Hashem created the world for someone to come there and make a bracha and drink, to make a blessing and say Hashem's name and make a blessing to drink. So that space, it was the water, it was the source of water, the body of water, and it was the space itself has been waiting. So when that person came there, made a blessing, drank the water, he channeled divinity into the water, into the spring, and into the space itself. And so Avraham Avinu, first of all, yes, he was old. He was developed. He was a person who had done the work, had grown spiritually in all the ways that he was supposed to. But he also had come into the days. There was not one day during his journey that he was not channeling divinity into the day, into the space that he lived in, and into the time that he was present in, into that day, into that moment. Now, it's very common for people, and I would say probably we all do this to some degree. First of all, there's a lot of variation from person to person, and there's supposed to be variation from person to person in lots of ways, including this way. And for a given person, there can be variation in different stages in our lives and different times throughout any given day, where we are focusing more on Zokein, on old, on our personal progress and development, or Ba Bayomim, focusing more on what are we channeling into the world around us? How are we influencing the people around us? What are we channeling into the space, into time, into the tangible material things that are in the world around us? Invariably, doing one is going to come with doing the other, but there could be different approaches that prioritize them differently and are going to focus a lot more on one or the other and are going to therefore emphasize more of one than the other and produce much more of an outcome in one versus the other. Right? There are some people who are supposed to be focusing more on their own personal development than on the contribution they're making to the world. There are some people who are supposed to be focusing more on the contribution they're making to the world than to their own personal development. Incidentally, the person who is genuinely, truly, in the correct way, working on their own personal development will invariably have a disproportionate impact on the world around them because they will be influencing people. People will look at them and learn from them, and then that will influence all of their lives and then the world around all of them and the things that they interact with. So it's not, there are no actual brick walls between these two things ever. Right? But there are people who are supposed to focus more on one, people supposed to focus more on the other. There are times in our lives when we're supposed to be really doubling down on learning, growing, developing, and then times in our lives when we're supposed to take all of that growth and development and now get to work on implementing into the world. Now, we can never stop working on learning, growth, and development, because if we do, right, like if there's an escalator and it's always on, it's either up or down. Those are the two options. So we always have to make sure it's up, but the time that we're spending on the escalator moving up is not as much as maybe it was at an earlier stage in our lives. In the morning, we wake up, we say Moda'ani, we pray, we study some Torah, we connect, we grow, we focus on the Zokein, on our own personal development, becoming an older, wiser, more developed person. Then we go out and we get to work and do what we've got to do throughout the course of the day. So everybody has to be doing both. And doing one automatically means doing the other. But different people are supposed to emphasize have different degrees to which they emphasize one or the other. Different people have different levels of balance and different stages in life, etc. Do you have a question?
Yeah, it feels like we're not explaining why Sara was the archetype. It feels like we're explaining why Abraham. So I still don't understand.
Well, it's not Abraham versus Sara. Now we're looking at Abraham and Sara as being one. And when it came to this specific aspect, the Torah explicitly lays it out in the context of Avram rather than Sara. But they are one in the same thing. They're one entity. They were one team. They were one composite entity.
Then why not just say Abraham and Sara, or not say Abraham?
It's a good question. Probably I would say that there are going to be several correct answers. One of them is, and I think the one that you're looking for, I don't know. There are other things there are other parts of this message and reasons why it was said in the context of Avram versus Sara. Now, I would say that to me, it's a given that there is a reason why, in the context of this thing that we're talking about also, the general idea of completeness was said in the context of her, and then this idea spelled out what does complete mean. It means both old and coming in days was said in the context of Avraham. I just don't know why that is, and it doesn't spell out here why those are separated across the two of them. I'm not sure. It's a good question, but ultimately they are one. It's like, if you have, for example, a business, a big company, and this company was founded on a very strong mission statement, a purpose, an ideal, and a lot of companies officially are, but whatever. But let's say it really is, and the person at the top of this is very focused on this mission and the purpose and the ideal, and they're a very effective leader, and this mission and ideal is built into the whole culture of the company, and everybody in the company knows, and it's built into they do activities, and it's everything. The ideals and the mission are built into every aspect of the culture of every part of the company, you could have people in the company who are doing completely different things, right? You have a person who goes and buys materials and then a person who does sales. One of them is bringing in money, or the person who's doing sales is bringing in money by moving out product. The person who's buying materials is giving out money and bringing in product. The actual thing they're doing is diametrically opposed, but both of them are going to have the same culture and the same motivation and the same mission and the same sense of purpose, even though they're doing different things. Why? Because they're part of a cohesive, properly developed and led team. Right? So even when it comes to Avram and Sarah, they're two different human beings, but they are part of a composite entity, a team. And the mission is the same, and this completeness is the same. And if part of it we could emphasize more explicitly and obviously and clearly with one of them, and the other part we can emphasize, more explicitly and clearly and obviously with the other one, and it's also very clear that they are a team and it's all part of the same thing, then that might be the best way to do it. Right? It could be that parts of the culture are going to be more obviously emphasized or more obviously visible with the salesperson, and other parts are going to be more obvious and explicitly visible when it comes to the person who buys materials. And when you discuss both of them, you get to see the whole picture. So it's an important part of, I just want to acknowledge that I'm not actually answering your question, and the question is still there. And I'm sure that there is an answer. Whether or not the answer is stated explicitly somewhere or not, I don't know. There definitely is a reason why it's like that. But without addressing that head on, I think as we sort of have this view of really being able to see them as one composite entity, it maybe takes the edge off the question a little. Which is like two parts of the same thing. Again, the question is there and I'm curious too. And to be honest, every time I learn this, Sikha, I do kind of think, oh yeah, but what about that? I do. That occurs to me every single time. It occurs to me, I would say it doesn't bother me.
It bothers me.
Okay, well, if you find the answer, please let me know.
Can I just summarize the two points of the sikha, the two different stands of the sikha? How would you word that?
When you say, are you talking about the Zaken and the Baba Yamim?
Yeah.
One is personal growth and development, and one is impact on the world, including time and space.
Okay.
So now we also see, so number one, we know that Avram and Sara are this team that was complete both in their own development and growth and in the channeling out into the world. Now, the nature of people, the nature of humans is that we're imperfect, and to some degree we're going to do in general everything imperfectly. And the more complex something is in life and the more complex the balance that's required for us to do it perfectly, the more likely it is that we're going to end up messing it up. Right?
Wait, say that again.
We are always, ultimately, human beings are going to be imperfect about everything. The more complex a balance is that we need to keep it, hypothetically, for something to be done perfectly, the more room there is for it to be messed up. I want to say messed up, to the more room there is for it to be done very imperfectly, just by virtue of the fact that we are imperfect people. This is an example of that. When it comes to focusing on self-development, prioritizing the self-development, personal growth part of the picture, versus prioritizing the affecting the world around us part of the picture, they're not opposite, they go hand in hand, but the direction of focus is opposite. The direction of focus of one is inwards. What do I need to be doing? Where do I need to change? Where do I need to grow? What do I need to do? And the focus on the other one is outward. What can I do to affect the world around me? And our nature is that we're only able to focus on one thing at a time. Multitasking, for example, is a fallacy. And there are very simple exercises you can do to illustrate this very clearly. Multitasking isn't really multitasking. It's switching back and forth between two things. Now, we can chew gum and walk at the same time because neither of those things require focus. But if you're doing two things that require focus and attention, what we're really doing when we think we're multitasking is switching back and forth. And every switch costs time and effort. So in actuality, invariably, if we would focus on one, do it, focus on the other one, do it, we would actually get that work done in much less time than if we are doing them both at the same time. Because you can't focus on two things at the same time. It's a technical impossibility. You can only focus on one thing at a time. So focusing on an inward direction means we're not focusing on the outward direction. Focusing on the outward direction means we're not focusing on the inward direction. We have to do both and we have to prioritize both. It's complicated and it's challenging. It's challenging to emphasize both and emphasize both in the right amount and then not get so caught up in one that we neglect the other one. And it could be either one. We could get caught up in self-development and neglect the world around us. We could get caught up in influencing the world around us and neglect our self-development. And both of those are very not ideal. Both of those are going to lead down ultimately a negative pathway if we go to the extreme. It's also important to understand that it's okay. We're humans and we do the best we can and we try to do both, try to focus on both. And we can, it's a good idea to have someone in our lives who can be honest with us, whether it's a friend, a mentor, someone who can just let us know, I think you're getting a bit carried away, a bit caught up, you're neglecting this, whatever it is. And so it's natural that we are very imperfect when it comes to balancing these two things. Also, personality-wise, some people are drawn more to one than the other. Now, to some extent, sometimes it means if a person by nature is drawn more to one than the other, it might mean that it's a good idea for them to prioritize that one sometimes. Right? And this becomes a whole big complex conversation. But it's very natural and common and ultimately normal and also ultimately, bottom line, okay, that we're not perfect, we're not tamim, we're not complete. We don't have both of them to the ultimate degree that's potentially possible. Avram and Sara did. Now, because Haim to Mimim, this is the so too, that connection between the two. What does it mean that they were complete? It means that they had the complete balance of both their own personal development and progress and the fact that with all of that development, growth, and progress, they were channeling divinity into the world around them, into the space that they occupied and into the time in which they existed, into the minutes, into the seconds, into the hours, into the days, the weeks, the months, and the years. So just like they were complete, so too their years were complete. Because their relationship with the time and with the years was complete. Their contribution into the years was complete. And so the natural outcome of that was that the years themselves were complete.